Thank you for joining us as we explore Amplify's digital resources and provide guidance around getting started with instruction. We understand the delay of materials at the start of the school year is a challenge, so we've developed guidance for you to help you get started with instruction starting day one of the school year. Our Amplify team has created a guide for you outlining the physical materials that will be necessary for each lesson of your first unit. By the end of our time together, we hope you feel comfortable and confident in the digital resources you have available to you and guidance we can provide to ensure that you have everything you need to get started with instruction. We appreciate your patience and understanding while we work to deliver these materials to you as soon as possible and are excited for you to begin instruction utilizing our digital materials. During our time together today, we are going to discuss Amplify's recommendation on printing material and digital recommendations when we may suggest a project over printing. We will also discuss implementation guidance so you not only know how to access the digital materials, but also how you will use the materials for instruction in your classroom. And lastly, we will do our best to make sure we are clear on what we recommend you print, how many copies you should print, whether you're printing for the entire class or just one copy per student, and times that it's not recommended to print and how you can use and utilize digital resources. If you're a kindergarten teacher or a leader who supports kindergarten, then you are in the right place. To get started, let's take a look at Kindergarten Skills Unit 1. For the first unit of Amplify Texas ELAR Skills, you really only need 3 things to provide instruction: your teacher guide, a student activity book, and the digital components that are found on the teacher resource site. Let's take a look at some of our material guidance to see how you can prepare these materials. For your teacher materials, our recommendation is to use the teacher guide as a digital resource. You can have it pulled up on your computer, an iPad, a smartphone, or use it digitally versus printing the entire teacher guide. You do have the option to download and print the guide if you chose to do so. If you print it, we'd recommend only printing out the actual daily lessons versus the entire guide, as our teacher guides are very lengthy documents. For your student materials, we do recommend printing 1 copy of the activity book pages needed for your daily lesson for each student. These activity book pages are used in class and also include some take-home homework and letters for families. Now let's take a look at your Skills Unit 1, Lesson 1. You'll see we've included your lesson at a glance, which is a very helpful resource for daily planning. As you begin to think about instructional implementation, the material column will be especially helpful. This section of the lesson at a glance will provide you with physical materials needed to execute the lesson. You'll see in Lesson 1 there are a few classroom materials needed: crayons, instruments or objects that make sounds and noises, chart paper, and small balls or objects. You will also need an activity book page 1.1 that would need to be printed for each student so that it can be sent home with your students. Now that we've talked about the unit and the lesson level materials, let's navigate to the teacher resource site to make sure we know where to find the materials needed. Let's first take a look at our teacher guide. You can see here I'm on the kindergarten landing page. This is where all of my kindergarten materials will be: skills, knowledge, all the additional ancillary components, and all sorts of planning documents on that daily instruction tab. So let's look at Skills Unit 1 Teacher Guide. Remember, you can access it digitally here, or if you're looking to print out lessons, you should navigate here as well to the lesson level and print. You can see whenever I click open on the teacher guide that it's going to download the guide for me, and at this point I have the opportunity to use it just as it is digitally, or I can navigate to the individual lessons in order to print at those lesson levels. So if I'm looking just to print at the lesson level, I'd be looking to start at page 9. I see that lesson 2 starts at page 18, lesson 3 at page 28, and so forth. So instead of printing the entire teacher guide, I would likely skip over some of this front matter, still read this front matter, all super important, but might not be necessary to print that unit introduction, and I would make sure that I would be moving directly to that lesson level where I'm printing my very first lesson. And you can see here, lesson 1 starts here on the respective page 9, like it said in our table of contents, and that's where I would start printing if I was going to print from my teacher guide. Let's take a look at that student activity book then. That next material that we're going to talk about is found right here. This is that student activity book. We do recommend opening, downloading, and printing copies of those lesson pages for every student. So you can see here when I open up my student activity book page, when I scroll to the very beginning, scrolling through a couple things of front matter, so I wouldn't need to print the entire file, but I would be looking here, and I know for my first lesson 1, it looks like there's a take-home page, as we saw in our lesson at a glance. So I'd be printing page 1 for students. That would be sent home. I also see that moving on, page 3, looks like that there is another take-home page for lesson 2. Lesson 3 has an activity book page that we actually are completing in class, so I would need to make sure that was printed in class. As well as lesson 3 has a take-home page, and you can continue to move forward to see how each activity book page coordinates with those daily lessons. So the importance of having these for every student will greatly help your instruction both in class and for take-home material purposes. Lastly, let's take a look for skills at those digital components. These were always meant to be digital, meaning that you're projecting these for your class to use. You'll see that if we're looking at digital components and we're looking at the table of contents, I actually don't have any digital components until lesson 3. So that third day of my skills lessons, lesson 3, it looks like I have something to project here for my class. And it's actually a demonstration mat that we'd be using together to demonstrate some sound and spelling correspondences. And so we would be using that digital components as a digital resource as it's always been meant to be used. All right, let's shift gears a bit more and move into the knowledge domain for kindergarten. You'll see we have a few more materials needed for your knowledge domain 1 nursery rhymes. We've included images of materials in both English and Spanish so you can see what is needed regardless of what language you are providing knowledge instruction for with your students. For the first domain in kindergarten, you will need your teacher guide, student activity book, digital components, flipbook, and image cards. Let's take a look at some of our material guidance to see how you can better prepare to use these materials. For your teacher materials, our recommendation, as we suggested for skills, is to use your teacher guide as a digital resource. You can have it pulled up on your computer, your iPad, a smartphone, to really use it digitally versus printing the entire teacher guide. You do have the option still to download it and print it if you choose to do so. At that point, if you are printing, we highly recommend that you're printing out the actual daily lessons versus printing the entire guide. For your student materials, we do, as we did in skills, recommend that you're printing 1 copy of each activity book page that you would need for your daily lesson for every student in your class. These activity book pages are used in class and also used for take-home work and also include letters for families. You will also see that we highly recommend projecting your flipbook instead of printing the flipbook. Your flipbook is used during your teacher read-alouds, and the images projected would help engage your students with that read-aloud lesson. And lastly, you will see that the image cards are materials that are used also during your knowledge lessons. These can be projected or printed based on the needs of your students in the classroom. If you feel it's helpful to have the images printed and posted in your classroom, then that makes sense. If you feel the image can be shown digitally and doesn't need to be posted, then projecting and sharing the image digitally at that point in the lesson is the way to go. Let's take a look at the Knowledge Domain 1, Lesson 1. You'll see we've included your lesson at a glance, that same helpful tool that you found in your skills teacher guide. That's what we use for those daily lesson planning purposes. And as you begin to think about instructional implementation, the material column here is also especially helpful. This section of the lesson at a glance will provide you with those physical materials that you need to execute the lesson. You'll see in kindergarten lesson 1, there's actually a part A and a part B. So you'll see that there's a 1A and a 1B. Here you're going to need some materials. You're going to see that you're going to need some books of nursery rhymes. There's also the flip book. There's an activity book page, and then some note cards that would be needed. Now that we've talked about the domain and lesson level materials for knowledge, let's navigate to the teacher resource site to make sure we know where to find the materials needed. Let's first take a look at our knowledge teacher guide. So you'll see that my knowledge teacher guide falls directly under all of my skills teacher guides, and I'm navigating to knowledge 1, that nursery rhymes and fables, our first domain for kindergarten. Remember, you can access your teacher guide digitally, or if you're looking to print out lessons, you're going to navigate to that individual lessons and print from there. Same as our skills teacher guide, there's a lot of front matter in the teacher guides. All important, all should still be read, all should still be used in planning and preparation, but you'll notice that just as in skills, we have a really lengthy unit introduction that gives you a lot of background knowledge around the domain and what to expect and a lot of the materials. That's information that you're still going to read. It's just not necessary to print. So I'm going to bypass all of that if I were for the purpose of printing and go straight to my first lesson. If I'm printing my first lessons, I'm starting here at 1A. I would be printing starting at page 5 and moving forward to print the lessons that I would be looking to print out from my teacher guide. Moving on, in the knowledge domain, I'm going to take a look at the activity book for students. And so we do recommend making a copy of the student activity book pages for each lesson for every student in your class. So you can see, same as all of our other resources, we download, we open, and then we are looking at the activity book pages that coordinate with those daily lessons. You'll see here for lesson 1, there's a take-home page that's several pages long. This is information that's going to be really helpful for families, for them to have resources and connections back to the work that you're doing in class that would go home with them at the end of that very first day of instruction. And then you can see, same with activity page 2.1. This is actually an assessment page, a recording sheet that you would be using for students in your class. And then after 2.1, you'll see that we jumped to 10.1. That means that we actually don't have an activity book page that coordinates with the knowledge domain 1 for our students until lesson 10. So lessons 1, lesson 2, we have them, and then not another one until lesson 10. So really important if you're thinking about managing materials, how much you're printing out that first week versus how much you're printing out for the entire unit, and just being thoughtful around just organization of all the materials that you may need to print out. Let's continue to look at some of the resources, and the next one that we're going to look at is that flip book. So remember, your flip book is that resource that accompanies your read aloud. So we've opened up the flip book here, and you can see that as we navigate through here, the images that accompany your read aloud are present here. There is no text. This is all images that accompany your read aloud. Your actual read aloud portion of your lesson is in your teacher guide. So in order to utilize this as a digital resource that you'd be projecting, you would have this image. This is image 1A that goes with that 1A part of your lesson 1. This would be projected for your students to see in your class, and you'd be using this as a form of engagement as it accompanies your read aloud, as you're reading aloud the text that is actually included in your teacher guide. So you would need your teacher guide available to you, so that way you would have your image projected and you'd be using your teacher guide for your read aloud purposes. You'll see that there's that image for 1A, and then that part B that is 1B. And then you'll see that just as everything else, it goes in order. So this would be for lesson 2A, lesson 2B, and so forth. So your images would be projected. Your teacher read aloud text is actually in your teacher guide. So you'd be using your teacher guide to be able to make sure that you have that read aloud lesson part of the opportunity for students. Continuing on, let's take a look at those image cards. The image cards can be found here. And you'll see that there are a number of images, And if I'm thinking back to some of the material guidance, that table format document, we really don't have any image cards needed until lesson 10. And so the images will be a point of use in your teacher guide. It will direct you to what images you should be using, but I'm letting you know that you don't have any images for the first several lessons, and actually it's not until lesson 10, so day 10 of knowledge, where you'd be using some of these image guides. And remember, this is your choice. Print these, you can project them, whatever is best for you and your students is available for you to use with these image cards. And the last thing I wanted to make reference of is those digital components. So similar to skills, those digital components have always meant to be digital. They've never meant to be printed or provided in front of point of use for students. They've meant to be projected digitally to your students and for you to use as a resource in your classroom. You'll see that we only have one digital component for that first knowledge domain, which happens at lesson 8, and it's a Venn diagram comparing Little Bo Peep and Little Boy Blue. Okay, so as we wrap up, a few important reminders as you're beginning to plan for your first unit of instruction. All the materials you need are available digitally. Our resources are all available on the teacher resource site, as you just have seen us walk through today. Your materials can be downloaded, printed, and projected. We want to make sure that you have options based off of your individual needs as the teacher, as well as your individual student needs. That at-a-glance table that we saw for both skills and knowledge is a valuable resource that provides you a quick overview of lessons. This should be your go-to resource for daily lesson planning. It will help you with timing, lesson components, grouping, and also for your current planning of materials. We want you to refer to the material guidance document for Unit 1 of instruction. It's roughly about the first 15 days of instruction. This tool has been created to help you take the guesswork out of what you need in order to plan for successful instruction during the first few weeks of school. And we will follow up with you to make sure you have access to this guidance document that we've created. And lastly, we want to leave you with some words of encouragement. You can do this, and we are here to help you. We're in your corner, and we look forward to a great school year ahead. And at the end of this, you still may have some questions or think of something you'd like to follow up on. And here's where you can turn next. We have an amazing website specific to Amplify Texas, available for you at texas.amplify.com. At this site, there are help articles, on-demand PD resources, and other great tools to help you be planned and prepared for using Amplify Texas ELAR, SLAR, kindergarten through 5th grade. If you need to reach out, you can do so in a couple ways. You can reach out to us via email, live chat directly from the teacher resource site, or through our toll-free number to talk to one of our amazing educational support team members. And in closing, we would like to once again say thank you. Thank you for your patience, thank you for your understanding, and thank you for all you do to ensure that your students are successful every single day. We are in your corner, and we will continue to provide ongoing support in the days to come as you begin your school year and as your materials begin to arrive on campus. We look forward to hearing and seeing your success and your victories. Thank you for your partnership, and have a wonderful start to the 2022 school year.